Welcome to the Massachusetts School of Law Educational Forum. This show is produced by the Massachusetts School of Law at Andover. We must not, in trying to think about how we can make a big difference, ignore the small daily differences we can make which over time add up to big differences that we often cannot foresee. These words of wisdom were spoken by Marian Wright Edelman, who founded the Children's Defense Fund in 1973. Hello, I'm Diane Sullivan, your host for today's show. Marian Wright Edelman began her career in the mid-60s as the first black woman admitted to the Mississippi bar. She has received many honorary degrees and awards. Her story leads us into the topic for today's show, women making a difference. Our first woman making a difference sees every day how the little things can add up to dignity, to self-respect, and to life. She is the president and the CEO of the Greater Boston Food Bank.
The Greater Boston Food Bank is essentially a charitable food business. We acquire food from manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, growers, sometimes bottlers, etc. It comes through the food bank facility, which is here in Boston, and then we redistribute out to over 600 charities throughout eastern Massachusetts. Nationally, we have about 200 food banks that look like us. They range in a few a little larger and many much smaller. And every county in the country is served by a food bank as part of the national system called America's Second Harvest. And in turn, we distribute to over 50,000 charities in the United States. So the manufacturer, wholesaler, retailer donates the product because it might be overproduced, a test market, a production error. And then in turn it's stored here and redistributed to charities that do direct feeding, pantries, soup kitchens, shelters, daycare centers, congregate feeding sites. Essentially, the food bank can provide food to any charitable nonprofit that's serving a population of need. And that is a distinguisher. So there are many nonprofits, but they're not serving a population of need. And so those are the two specifics. And they have to do so either by giving a box of food or preparing a meal. And those are our basic criteria that are set for us in the Tax Reform Act of 1976, oddly enough. But that's what we do. We acquire, centralize, and then redistribute based on need.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about some of the households that ultimately end up with the food from the Greater Food Bank.
Sure. Who is hungry is always of interest in terms of it's a surprising outcome when you think that over 300,000 people are in need of food services here in eastern Massachusetts alone. And they are folks that own homes or that live in homes. Nearly 80% of the clients that we serve, the individuals served through the Greater Boston Food Bank, have a home to go to. Only about 20% are homeless. It's a common misnomer that everybody's homeless, when in fact that's not the case. All homeless people are hungry, but not all hungry people are homeless. Another third work full-time, and individuals are out working, but often at minimum wage. So their entire income is often very small because of the minimum wage factor. And even in Massachusetts, even though we have done some really good work to progressively advance minimum wage, when you look at the country, you still have a very low wage, just a little bit over $5. And when you work full-time, you're not even bringing home $10,000 a year, let alone any other types of benefits like health care, which is an increasing cost. The type of client also, with predominant number of children, there are elders in the mix, there are families, and what puts somebody in need of food is a variable on the economy. It can be a variable on your education. It can be what family you were born into. It could be a health concern. But most of our clients make trade-offs. They're making trade-offs to use their food money to pay their rent or mortgage, or they're using their food money to heat their homes, especially in the Northeast. And in the third way, they're making that trade-off to use for medication. So three very expensive elements in the Northeast. So housing, fuel, and healthcare. And that's where you see a trade.
It was interesting when I was reading about your organization. I was astounded to find out that about a third of your clients are kids under 18.
Correct. Children are very vulnerable and they need advocates. They need grown-ups like us to be able to help advance. They can't speak up and say, hey, excuse me, I didn't get my lunch today. Could you give me something? So it's a very significant role in the United States when you see that volume of children, especially children in school. If we look at Boston alone, they have a very high utilization of free or reduced meals in the school system. It's nearly 80% of those children. So those families live and work in Boston and et cetera. That multiplies throughout the state and throughout the United States. Children are extremely vulnerable when it comes to an adequate food supply.
Catherine, no child in the United States should be hungry.
Right.
Am I correct when I assume that we have enough food in this country? It's just, the problem seems to be we're not getting the food into the mouths of the hungry. Am I right about that?
Well, distribution is a big piece of the puzzle, and access. Yeah, I often look at food as a collateral or a currency, just like money. It's like, I'd like some more money too, right? And food is the same way. Where do I go to get it? I need some more. Unfortunately, our system is such that you need to go to a pantry or a soup kitchen to access that versus being able to sustain your family through appropriate employment or education or being able to bring in resources, even from other family members. So it is a common truth. There is an adequate food supply. There are enormous amounts of products that are still wasted. An example would be I can bring donated beans in from the Southwest to Massachusetts, but to bring them across the country is in the thousands of dollars just to transport them, not pay for them, just to transport them. So that becomes a barrier in terms of an adequate food supply. So the more we can do to connect the individual that needs the food to the location or place where they can get it is a part of what we do. More importantly, jobs are one of the best answers to hunger in terms of a family's ability to take care of themselves.
Another significant part of the population that goes to bed hungry is the elderly.
Yeah.
What can be done about that?
Well, it's a forgotten population. And we see it here. Do you want to give money to feed a child or to feed an elder? 9 times out of 10, the person's going to say, I want to help the child, when in fact it's an aging population and growing in terms of being able to find adequate food supply. Elders are not accustomed to standing in line or going to seek even food stamps or some really very good federal programs that are available. It's not in their sort of lexicon or their vocabulary to be able to do that. And so they're very dependent to go, they might go to their church community or they might go right in their own neighborhood relative to something safe. Many years ago we did establish what are called brown bag programs, which actually bring food to where the elders are, where they're already congregating. So it might already be at a senior center or an elder meal site. We'll actually bring food, like a mobile pantry, right into that site. And then it's socially acceptable for everybody to take that bag home versus you and not you.
Yeah.
So it's like you get a bag of food. So it creates a more level comfort and not the stigma of that I'm in need. Elders also are a population that don't, especially in need, voice a lot. It's very common to go to an elder's home that's in need, and there's not much there in the household. But the pride and the importance of standing proud is quite significant. I saw that with my own parents. Would be, Mom, have you eaten today? Well, no, I'm fine. You eat. And having grown up in that. So I see our role as the Greater Boston Food Bank being more involved in helping to sustain the food to elders. Their nutritional needs are also extremely different. Not unlike a child has a different nutritional need. Elders need protein and potassium, a lot of B6 and B12. And those are particular foods. Though I'm delighted to say that elders know what to do with produce. When you give an elder a cabbage, they know what it is and what to do with it. Our challenge is more that young people don't know a lot about what fresh produce is or what to do with it. So we distribute quite a bit of fresh produce to the elderly.
It is my hope, or perhaps even my objective, that people in the audience will be moved by what you have to say and say, what can I do to help?
Sure. Well, there are a number of ways. I mean, we believe very strongly here, one of our core values as an organization is that everyone has a role in ending hunger. And it's what is the best fit for you as an individual, you as a family. Clearly, three things make the food bank go. That's food, money, and time. And not everybody has all three. And usually they have one or two. They're willing to write a check and volunteer, or do a food drive and volunteer. Those are the types of ways in which people can get involved. We hear a lot from people that they want something that they can do with their kids.
Yeah.
Some way in which they can share that value, as I shared with you early on, about something that impacted my life. They want to be able to do that. So they can volunteer, do canned food drives, write a check is always easy.
Tell the audience a little bit about the Second Harvest and the relationship to the
Sure.
Greater Boston Food Bank.
Nationally, we sort of sit within an entity called America's Second Harvest, the nation's food bank network. So there are over 200 food banks like Boston in that system. So it's actually about 208 warehouses throughout the United States. The largest being New York City, and Boston sits in the top 20. So large is, in our mind, isn't physical plant, but distribution. So the volume of pounds of food and the numbers of meals being served. Collectively, it's over 50,000 charities and over about $2.5 billion worth of product that's donated. So in that system, we handle federal commodities that come through the United States Department of Agriculture. We handle donated foods that come both from national donors as well as regional or local donors. And then many of us have state programs or state commodity programs, and we're fortunate in Massachusetts to have one. But what the Second Harvest system does is put us together as best practices. What are the pieces, what works well in Boston, but it works better in maybe perhaps another state that we can learn from, or another food bank. And I'm fortunate that I've worked both on the West Coast and the East Coast in terms of this network, and seeing what it has to offer. There are great professionals and people that have dedicated their lives to engaging the public into the issues of hunger and trying to find the best solutions. We're very much, our whole system is very much in support of both teaching the person to fish as well as giving the person the fish. I think we're more on the side of the giving the person to be able to acquire and distribute food. But we work very well with both nationally, locally, and regionally with other organizations that do a lot of advocacy in promoting particular kinds of public policies. But Second Harvest is the largest domestic hunger relief organization in the United States with this network of food banks.
If you could debunk one myth about hunger, what would it be?
Wow, that's a great question. I think a lot of people, there are people that would assume that, I have two myths actually. The one is that the answer to hunger isn't always food. I think that's the first one. Food is what we can do best, and we need help to do that. It's much more to me about jobs and the security of income. The second one is that hungry people just need to, step it up and take care of themselves and just get going. When in fact, if I think of what's going on in Massachusetts as a very expensive state to live in, when it costs you nearly $2,000 a month to live in Boston in a 2-bedroom apartment, that's a difficult challenge to achieve. And so these are working people. These are people that are sort of playing by the rules, but it's still really difficult to feed your family.
Sure.
So I think those are the two sort of myths. Food is one very important part of the puzzle, but employment and adequate education and job training keeps families in a place where they can sustain themselves. But in the meantime, we'll be here to help them.
Catherine, I think at the end of the day, most people hope they can say they've made a difference. I can think of no one that makes a greater difference than you do.
Well, our work is very significant when it comes to a particular person's life. And I know for us that when we achieve our mission, which is to help end hunger in eastern Massachusetts, and in doing so ensuring that there's an adequate food supply, that it's my hope that that person that comes to a pantry or that kid in an after-school program or that elder at a mill site, that they're not worried about whether there's enough food that day. If that is achieved, then we're doing our job. Then the front door or the seamlessness to the individual seeking assistance is met, and that they can leave that site with pride and knowing that they're going to be okay for the next couple of days. And I feel very good about that. A lot of our work is very hidden. You don't often hear about the Greater Boston Food Bank, but you might hear about all the organizations that we supply food to. Well, we're a significant part of their ability to do that and for their ability to achieve their mission. So I know all of us here at the Greater Boston Food Bank feel very good about what we do and knowing that when we do our job, people eat. And when we don't do our job well, people don't eat. That's very significant.
Tell me a little bit about you, some of your training to take on this huge job.
Well, you know, I often say that nobody grows up to be a food banker. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like you don't go to the university to get your degree in it. So many of us, most of us, fall into it. I fell into it by studying theology in my undergraduate work in San Francisco and having a family that had some sense of value. Mm-hmm. And the issues of social justice at the time in the 70s in San Francisco that are still the same issues today. They feel a little different, but they're still about housing and job training and poverty. I mean, the outcomes of poverty and the significance of that is will impact what we do forever. So for me, I've had the good fortune of being a part of the restaurant business. As I stated earlier, having grandparents who were farmers, so I grew up on the farm. My grandfather taught us that, you know, we use every part of the pig, every bit of the pig, but the squeal was his saying. You know, so you learn how to use it all. So that impact for me was very significant. And then being in San Francisco in the mid-70s to late 70s, going to college, was another very impactful experience. Mm-hmm. You know, my son will say to me, you know, Mom, did you really, you know, go out in the streets and demonstrate and rally and do all this? It's like, yeah, we did. That's what we did in the 70s. You know, you guys text message each other or meet me at the Starbucks. I don't know, you know, what you're doing, but it's a whole other way that kids today and the other generations choose to act. I mean, they can do it electronically. Mm-hmm. You know, you can send one email to every congressman in one stroke. That's pretty fabulous, where before we had to get up and go and do it. So I think the experience of being a food banker is one that allows me to use a lot of business acumen, a lot of issues, things that are relative to efficiencies and return on investments and working with partners. But on the same hand, to be a very mission-driven organization is a good fit for me.
We need to take a break. When we return, we will speak with the first female Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Welcome back to the Educational Forum. Zig Ziglar said, "It's not what you've got, it's what you use that makes a difference." Our next guest has done just that. She has used her charm, her brains, her tenacity, and her wit to become the first woman Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Professor Constance Rudnick from the Massachusetts School of Law sat down with the then District Attorney. Let's listen in.
I have said a lot since I've become a prosecutor, particularly, that I watched a lot of Perry Mason when I was growing up. And although it wasn't always clear that I would go to law school, I thought a lot in college about either being in journalism or in law. And I remember speaking with a friend of mine who actually went to the Columbia School of Journalism, and we talked about whether we wanted to make the news or report on the news. And I've always been interested in both, because I'm interested in communication and how we do that and how we get messages across. I'm good at arguing, and I like being on my feet, and I had a chance in high school to do a lot of high school debate. So I guess being a trial lawyer was something that I thought about fairly early on, and decided probably my junior year in college that law school made the most sense for me rather than business school or even journalism.
And when you first graduated from law school, you went into private practice?
Yes,
Is that right? Okay.
and I worked in Boston for one litigation firm, so I was in court all the time in Suffolk and Middlesex. I used to come over here in 1979, 1980 to do the civil motion session here when we still
In
did
6A.
that. Yes, exactly. And then I left in 1986. I went to another firm after that and did civil litigation in a larger firm, and started in 1986 as an assistant district attorney, so just 20 years ago.
All right. And what made you go from private practice, which can be very lucrative in downtown Boston firms, to being an assistant district attorney?
Well, as much as I liked a lot about the practice, and I worked with some great lawyers and I worked on some large cases and found some of that interesting, I really liked being in court and wanted to get more hands-on trial experience, and decided that criminal work was really the only way to do that. Part of that happened because at the firm I started doing some pro bono criminal defense work. I found it fascinating, I found it exciting, and I found that it really made me use my skills in something that I thought was important. Not that civil litigation isn't, but the issues that faced a lot of criminal defendants, for instance, who couldn't afford counsel. And the way that assistant district attorneys looked at cases, to me, was someplace where I thought I could do well and get also job satisfaction from getting things done and getting decisions made in cases where people's, liberty was at stake. And as a defense lawyer, it was making sure that their rights were protected. But as a prosecutor, I found it's making sure that people who are victimized, people who are dangerous are held accountable, and people who are victimized have a voice in the system.
At some point, obviously, you decided that you wanted to be the Middlesex district attorney, and that made you a politician as well as an attorney. So what made you decide to take on that particular challenge?
Well, that's a whole different ballgame, of course. Running for office is very different from being as prosecutor, you are very low-key. You actually you want to be anonymous. You want to sort of work behind the scenes. But I had the great opportunity to work in this office in Middlesex under Scott Harshbarger and Tom Riley. And when Tom Riley decided he was going to run for Attorney General, my first thought was not that I would run for DA. I was going to work on his campaign and probably look at working in the AG's office. But then a couple of things happened. I was involved in a little case called Commonwealth versus Louise Woodward. And the race for Middlesex DA started to heat up a little bit. And people said to me, you should really run. You're good, people know who you are, you have a good reputation. And so I said, I thought about it for a little bit, and I jumped in that race in December. I said I sold my house and I moved to Middlesex County, and said if I lose, then I'll take a year off and do something else. But I said if I don't do it now, I will never do it. So I call myself an accidental politician. I really wanted this job, and the only way to get it was to run for it. I had a little bit of experience thinking I might run for DA in Boston way back, and I ran in a race for state rep in Dorchester, but that was really because I had no experience with politics, and I said, if I'm ever going to do this, I need to know how this works. And so I started at a state reps race and actually liked it. I was knocking on doors and meeting people and in debates and raising money in my kitchen, and found that also too was very exciting and energizing as someone who's watched politics from afar, but who also cares about how the system works. How do we get our message across? How do we change things? How do we make things work? The ability for me to get the experience politically meant that I could then try and run for DA, and I think that was a message that resonated with voters back in '98.
What did you think you could do as the district attorney as opposed to an assistant district attorney?
Well, of course, as DA, you're in charge, and although you don't get to try cases much anymore, which I miss, you get to pick your staff, you get to train your staff, you get to set policy on how you're going to go forward on cases, on which cases do you enter into a change of plea, which cases do you say, no, we've got to go to trial. But most importantly, I think it was the sense that leadership and the way you run a good office has to come from the top, that you could set the standards for ethical, tough but fair prosecution. You could do some work in your communities with the schools and with domestic violence. Certainly something I've seen as DA, that it's not just about when someone breaks the law and we hold them accountable, it's what can we do before that happens to keep people safer. And that includes, starting in grammar school with the kids that we know may be headed to be in trouble, to cause trouble, and can't we do better with our prevention work? So that has been fascinating for me in our 54 cities and towns, to work with our police chiefs, our fire chiefs, our school superintendents, and our principals, our teachers, healthcare counselors, around kids and what they do and how we keep them safe. Because I've said this many times, if you went to a maximum security prison and talked to someone talked to the third grade teacher of someone who was doing hard time, that teacher would say, I knew this kid was headed for trouble. And we just don't either recognize or put the resources in or do enough early to keep kids on track.
You mentioned the Woodward case. Can you identify a couple of either cases or programs that you've been involved in that you think have made a difference, not just in you and your own personal growth, but in the community that you serve?
I think there are cases, probably most of them are child abuse cases, and Woodward is one of them. I think we feel proud of the fact that there's been a much greater level of education about shaken baby syndrome, and emergency room doctors, for instance, who will identify it. Prevention work with hospitals on teaching new parents or caretakers on how babies can cry and make people angry, and how I think we've done some work there, and I think we've prevented the kind of defense from being used successfully around the country in the Woodward case. And so that's satisfying to find not only in that case did we get a good conviction that was upheld for manslaughter, but we've done some education around it. And I think the other cases that have an impact that I get satisfaction out of are ones that aren't necessarily the big headline cases, when there's an institution that doesn't file a 51A that should, to keep a child safe. There's a responsibility to do that, and we've had some cases, some we've negotiated and some we've not. But we have to keep reminding our schools and our superintendents and our police officers and our caretakers of children that when they know about abuse, they have to report it. That's the only way we're going to keep our kids safe, both from physical and sexual abuse. We've had a range of high-profile cases in this county, as you know, and whether it's workplace violence with Michael McDermott and sort of working with companies around better ways to assess threats, the school safety issues that have come up, and cases like the hockey dad case, where we've also then worked with parents about trying to recognize when parental enthusiasm for sports has gone over the top. Those are the cases that sort of bring up a bigger message and say, wait a minute, why did this happen? And what can we do with our community leaders to try and make sure that doesn't happen again?
As you were going through life, making your decisions about where to go to college, where to go to law school, did you take into account the fact that you were a woman and desire to do something because you were a woman, to set a standard, or just to be out front as one of the earlier groups of women to really make strides in the workplace?
I always thought that I was lucky that I grew up in a family of 4 girls and a boy, and my brother was the youngest. My parents always put a big premium on education, and the fact that we were girls, and I know this in looking back because I didn't know it at the time, didn't seem to matter. They expected us to do well in school. They expected us to go to college and to have careers, and I think that background was coincident with, the 70s and the feminist movement and some changes right in my backyard, for instance, that allowed me to attend Williams College because they recognized that it was important to educate young women. And the connections and the friends I made there, also at a school that had been all male, taught me that there are a lot of opportunities for women, but some of them we have to work for. And when I went to law school, I recognized that, a lot of the doors still aren't open for women. And working with other women in the Women's Bar Association was very helpful to sort of do a reality check on, am I crazy or is this unfair? And I've been lucky, I think, in the legal career to be able to compete in the marketplace, in the public sector, with voters, but always recognizing that sometimes for women it's a little harder that women do have kids, they do have families. That's important for government and for private practice to recognize, and I still look to those issues that women are going to be more sensitive to because we live them. Getting jobs, having families, keeping our kids safe, making sure that women get a fair shake in the marketplace. And we know that's still not true, that for women, they may work and then come home and still have jobs to do. And women who are divorced or who are widowed or who are single, the responsibilities of earning a living and keeping the family together still seem to be unfairly divided. And you know, I don't get argumentative about it, but I feel very strongly about the need to make sure we keep our eye on the ball for fairness for women. Because I think some women coming in through the system now think that life is a fair playing field, and they will get their eyes wide open at some stage.
Right. For those of us who graduated in the 70s, graduated college and law school in the 70s, we grew up in a time where we didn't expect the playing field to be equal.
Exactly.
And now you've got a whole generation of young women who actually do. Do you sense that in your staff? Do you see a difference between women who are your chronological peers or closer to your own age versus women who are fresh out of law school in their 20s? Do they have a different attitude than you did when you started out?
I think that they've had some great advantages, which we sort of fought for, struggled for. And I think for many of them, for those, for instance, who come to work for government, have already recognized that, you know, life isn't fair. You can't have the $100,000, $200,000 job as a new lawyer and have time with your kids or think about a family. And interestingly, many of the women who choose to come and work in my office or work in other public offices, who are very good, who've gone to great law schools, who could work anywhere, say, I want to work somewhere where I care about the work I do, that I can make a difference in the work I do, and that there's a reasonable time commitment. I mean, people here work pretty hard. People will put in sometimes 50, 60 hours a week if they're working on trial. But they know if a trial breaks down or if they take vacation and they're not here around the clock, and we cover for each other. I also have great women who work part-time, and it's worked very well for the Commonwealth because they get time with families and I get their talent. And I think that's important. I think private sector has to recognize that for women the choices are still tougher than they are for men. And you know, we're going to lose a lot of good women because they say, I want to spend time with families and kids. We want that to happen. We know that, you know, having strong family backgrounds is important for children to grow up healthy and strong. And I still think women have to make more tough choices than men do around balancing their personal life and their professional life.
I have one last question. Do you think of yourself as a role model?
I guess I do, in the sense that I've done what I wanted to do, and that's the message I try and get across when I talk to young women thinking about going to law school, or should I stay home, or should I should I get a nanny? What should I do around these things? And I think the message is that I've been lucky to make the choices with support from family, friends, now my husband, around things that were important to me. And in that sense, yeah, I think that I am a role model, but it's not that, you know, you have to go off and work full-time as a politician or you should be a prosecutor. The message is that, you know, you have a lot to contribute to the private sector, to the public sector, to your family, and you need to be able to make those choices and be comfortable with that. Otherwise, you're going to feel pulled in a lot of different ways. And the encouragement I give is that if you're not happy, then people around you aren't going to be, and you're not going to be doing well at anything. So I'd like to think that people are encouraged to do what they care about and what they love. And in that sense, I guess I do see myself as a role model.
We need to take our second break. Please stay with us as we explore the lives of two more women who are making a difference.
Every day, online predators make their way into homes uninvited and unnoticed. Help delete online predators. To learn what you can do to protect your kids' online life, visit cybertipline.com.
Welcome back to the Educational Forum. As Stevie Wonder said, We all have ability. The difference is how we use it. That quote fits our next guest perfectly. She is an oncology surgeon and a specialist at the Mass General Hospital, who is also a member of the International Medical Surgical Response Team.
I have an interest in, I guess, in the past decade I've been here 13 years, but in the past decade I've tried to keep learning about things that are important in the care of women with cancer. And that's how I got into acupuncture. And I now do acupuncture on Mondays. And a typical Monday for me would be from 8 till 5. I see about 10 to 15 people. And in my acupuncture practice, I'll see both men and women, mostly people with cancer who have symptoms or side effects from either their therapy or their cancer, such as a neuropathy, which is numbness and tingling in the fingers of the feet. That is a common side effect to some of the major chemotherapy drugs that we use. Other things, nausea from chemotherapy, for many people that can be alleviated. Stress is a big thing. There's some people who come in and just say, I am so stressed from what I'm going through. I can't relax. So what can you do? Well, you can drug them up and make them sleepy with relaxants and tranquilizers and antidepressants, and many of those are very good, helpful things for some people.
Yeah.
But additionally, acupuncture is very helpful for that and for depression. I'll also see, just as another thing, I also have seen people who don't have cancer in my acupuncture practice who have pain or depression or stress.
Would you provide for the audience an overview of some of the major cancers that women face?
The cancers that are called GYN cancers would include ovarian cancer, uterine, cervical cancer. There's also rarer forms of cancer that involve the lower part of the female region, such as the vulva and the vagina. Breast cancers would generally be included. We do have a separate subspecialty just devoted to breast, as breast cancer really is the most frequent cancer affecting women in the United States, except for women who smoke cigarettes. And for women who smoke cigarettes, their risk of lung cancer is much higher than breast cancer. But breast cancer is about 1 in 8 women, so that's a separate specialty. So in the GYN cancers, the most common cancer is cancer of the uterus, and that's a very treatable cancer. Most women are through the menopause. They present with some abnormal bleeding. They have an evaluation with a biopsy of their uterus that picks up the cancer. The treatment is a surgery called a hysterectomy, which means removing the uterus and cervix, and then also the tubes in the ovaries are removed. And in the majority of women, luckily this cancer is cured, because it's usually found very early, because there's a very early warning sign. The important tricky thing with this cancer is that about 25% of women with this cancer are not menopausal, they're younger, and sometimes in the younger age group there can be a delay in diagnosis because you're thinking of other things, you're thinking it's hormonal, and sometimes they will not immediately get a biopsy. So that's one message that I always like to give younger women, is if they have abnormal bleeding in their 30s and 40s, while it's unlikely to be cancer, it could be, and they need a biopsy.
Get it checked immediately.
Exactly. So that's an important consideration. The cancer that is our biggest struggle is ovarian cancer. And unfortunately, unlike uterine cancer, where we have this nice early warning sign, in ovarian cancer, it doesn't hurt. It's rare to cause irregular bleeding. And so frequently women will come in with this cancer where it has already spread off the ovaries.
So it's in an advanced stage.
Right, right.
You know, Dr. Goodman, I grew up believing that if you went to the doctors every year and you had a pap smear, it would pick up ovarian cancer or any of the other major female cancers. That's not true, is it?
It isn't. Now, pap smears are really important because the third very important GYN cancer is cervical cancer. And cervical cancer can be just about completely prevented by getting pap smears. Pap smears will pick things up before they've turned into a cancer. So it's not even a warning sign. You can pick them up when they're pre-cancers. You can treat them before you even need to do something like a hysterectomy.
Yeah.
So that's cervical cancer, and that's the success story.
So it's important to get a pap smear.
Yeah, in fact, in the United States, the leading risk factor for cervical cancer is not getting a pap smear. The majority of women who come in with cervical cancer have not had a pap smear in more than 5 years. And to me, that's a real tragedy. You always hear about, you know, a pap smear missing something. That does happen. Nothing's perfect. And there will definitely be the occasional woman who will come in with a cervical cancer who had a completely normal pap smear a year ago. That's the rarity. It's usually the case where it's really tragic, where someone just hasn't had a pap smear. Unfortunately, ovarian cancer is very frustrating. We keep thinking, gee, if we could only find that symptom that will pick it up early, or that blood test, and there sure is a lot of work looking at those things, but we're not there yet.
Turn back the clock, if you would, Dr. Goodman, to the time when you were a little girl. How does a young girl grow up to be such an accomplished surgeon?
I've always wanted to be a doctor since, like, at least since I was 3.
Wow.
I mean, you know, I think I was born, but I didn't, you know, until I was pre-verbal. So, and I know that there's other people like that too, where you just sort of, you just always know you want to be a doctor. And I remember when I was a little kid, I used to like wrap my mother's arms with ace bandages. You know, so it was always part of my focus, was I wanted to do that. So that was always really clear to me that I wanted to do that. I sort of think that you have mentors and you have people who believe in you, and having people who believe in you sort of is something that helps you get through the bad times, or gets you through the self-doubt that I think everyone has, where you don't know if you're really good enough to do it and stuff like that. I mean, I think that my grandmother, my father's mother, was sort of this kind of angel in my life and felt like she really believed me. My father, my mother, I mean, all these people have believed that I could do what I do. Never, you know, tried to dissuade me to do something different. I think in medical school and in residency and in fellowship and in postgraduate, it never stops. There's always these people for magical reasons who come by and become your teachers and your gurus, and they sort of become part of you. I'll give you an example. Dr. Philip McGovern, I'd like to honor him because he recently died. I think he was about like 65 when he died. He died of a heart attack. This was about a month ago, so this is very, very fresh. But he has been, in my life, one of my advocators and true believers and role models for someone who always believed that you have to have the courage to do the right thing to take care of people. And he was an old OB guy. He was at Cambridge Hospital, and actually he passed away after having a heart attack. And the last thing he did before he became ill was delivering a baby. So, you know, he was a really great guy. So I like to honor him. But he believed in me, and he was always there. So you always have these people who kind of make you feel like you have the courage to do the right thing.
And they're in the background saying, "Go Annie Catherine."
Everybody, when I operate and I'm doing something, every technique that I do, everything that I do, I think about the person who taught me. And when I'm teaching it to someone else, I teach it to them, and I know that there's this sort of long line of people behind me, so there's something really cosmic about that.
Yeah. Where were you educated?
So I went to college at University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. I did my first 2 years of medical school at Penn State University in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which was a great experience. And one of my first mentors was there. He was a gynecologic oncologist. His name is Steve Curry. He's now down in Connecticut. And he was the head of the hospice movement in the 80s in Pennsylvania, back when hospice was not a well-known concept in the United States. And he used to do home visits. And as a little medical school student, I used to go on home visits with him. So he's in my heart. And then I transferred to Tufts Medical School, and I finished my training in Boston. And I went on and did my residency in obstetrics and gynecology at Tufts New England Medical Center. And Steve Curry was at Tufts when I was there, so he continued to be my mentor. And then I came to Mass General to do my fellowship.
And you never left Boston?
I don't know. This is a great place to be.
Well, we're very, very fortunate. What is your life like today?
Well, I have a husband who has been an MIT computer nerd, electrical engineer kind of person. And then, about 5 years ago, I might have that wrong, he was working in this little software company, and that was bought out by a bigger company, and so he retired and he went to law school. And
oh my!
And he graduated from law school 2 years ago, and he presently is clerking for a judge and really, really having fun.
Good.
So he's just, he has this great love of life, and he's somebody who's incredibly supportive. So he's there, and I met him because we both were crazy about animals. I had 2 dogs at the time when I met him, and 3 cats, and he had a dog. And presently I have 4 cats and a dog. So animals are very important. All our vacations include going and visiting zoos and seeing what's up with the animals in zoos and stuff like that. Aside of that, my life is devoted to work. And in addition to being a GYN oncologist, I'm also a member of the disaster team. It's called the IMSIRT, the International Medical Surgical Response Team, which I joined after September 11th, 2001. And I've gotten to do a few missions, I guess you'd call them, with some incredible people. So this is really outside my primary training. But I did go to Iran after the horrible earthquake in Bam. And there were 60 of us who went in there. That was the first contact, official contact between the United States and the Iranians in 24 years since the Iranian Revolution, is that they asked us to come in to help. So we came in and spent a few weeks there setting up a mobile surgical unit and stuff like that. That was really a profound thing to do. And I'm still in touch with a lot of the Iranians that I met there. For the sadness that's going on presently in the world, that really breaks my heart. I sort of know that the people are good people, and that ultimately it's all about love between individuals.
Tom Brokaw once said, "It's easy to make a buck. It's a lot tougher to make a difference." Our next guest has seen firsthand how hard making a difference really is. She is a filmmaker and activist who discovered her passion for economic justice while studying and conducting field research at Emerson College.
Second World is a dynamic organization that started out of my desire to put together 3 important elements. So that's media production, I do documentary work, music events, and fair trade art. So I wanted to put all those together in one package and try to address some of the problems in the world, poverty, some heavy, hard-hitting problems, but to do it in a solution-oriented way, a way that looks at solution first.
Tell the audience what you mean by fair trade.
Fair trade is basically providing an alternative to the things that people usually remember or can hold on to as far as concepts go, is child labor and exploitation. So fair trade is an answer to those issues and to provide opportunity for people to get a livable wage, improve their environments, their standards of living, but also pay attention to their cultural values and how to preserve their cultural identity at the same time. And that's what Second World cares about a lot, is the preservation of culture through providing incentives and micro-enterprise opportunities to create art that will communicate something about the culture, but at the same time bridge a gap, provide economic opportunities for people as well.
And your work, I mean, is breathtaking, because what it does for me is it captures the culture of places I've never been, and it's really, really wonderful.
Thank you.
Valerie, in an ideal world, would people buy goods that are fair trade, and how do they know if something is a fair trade product?
Well, basically, the first thing that folks will notice is, even when they go into a McDonald's now, they'll see fair trade coffee. That's usually the first introduction to fair trade for many folks. And so the way for people to understand what is fair trade and what is not is usually, if most times, if it says nothing, or if it says made in China, or it says Philippines or Bangladesh or nothing else, most likely it's made in a factory, most likely it's made in questionable circumstances. And so fair trade, there's several different labeling organizations out there that are right now, as we speak, establishing standards. And you'll see the Fair Trade Federation logo. You'll also see information about the producers and their living and working conditions, and just information about the sustainability of the materials that they're using. So you'll know it when you see it.
What are the objections to fair trade? Do people worry about, oh, well, we're going to pay more for products?
That's what people assume, but fair trade is actually fair all the way around. And people are amazed that it can still be affordable, and you're not going to a discount chain store or anything, but you're going to a boutique, or you're going to someone's personal gallery, or you're going to an organization like 10,000 Villages. People usually know that fair trade experience by going into those stores and seeing, you know what, it's not that much more expensive. If anything, it's the same, and then it's handmade with care and quality, and it's special, and it carries a little bit of the person with it inside of the item. So it's almost like you're becoming part of that experience of that family. It's like a communication between two sides of the world, as I see the art doing that.
Tell me, what inspired you initially to do this work?
Well, for me, I guess fair trade has been part of my charter before I even knew that phrase. I've been very interested in culture and learning about the world from a young age, and I can remember watching all the different National Geographics and such on TV, and as growing up and reaching out to neighbors and being involved in different events and fundraisers, and then learning how to run events, and then eventually going to study through the School for International Training and